I am not the only one who has been an atheist in a foxhole. I felt at the time that it was the least I could do for her, as well as the most. The people shelling and sniping were Serbian Christians, but then so was she. In northern Uganda, in late 2005, I sat in a centre for the rehabilitation of kidnapped and enslaved children, in the land of the Acholi people who live on the northern side of the Nile. The listless, vacant, hardened little boys and some girls were all around me. Their stories were distressingly similar. They had been seized at the age of anything from 8 to 13 from their schools or homes by a stone-faced militia that was itself originally made up of abducted children. Marched into the bush, they were initiated into the force by one or two of two methods. They either had to take part in a murder themselves in order to feel dirtied up and implicated, or they had to submit to a prolonged and savage whipping, often of up to 300 strokes. Children who have felt cruelty, said one of the editors of the Acholi people, know very well how to inflict it. The misery inflicted by this army of wretches turned zombies was almost beyond computation. It had razed villages, created a vast refugee population, committed hideous crimes such as mutilation and disemboweling, and, in a special touch of evil, had continued to kidnap children, so that the Acholi were wary of taking strong countermeasures lest they kill or injure one of their own. The name of the militia was the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, and it was led by a man named Joseph Kony, a passionate former altar boy, who wanted to subject the area to the rule of the Ten Commandments. He baptized by oil and water, held fierce ceremonies of punishment and purification, and ensured his followers against death. His was a fanatical preachment of Christianity. As it happened, the rehabilitation centre in which I was sitting was also run by a fundamentalist Christian organisation. Having been out into the bush and seen the work of the LRA, I fell to talking with the man who tried to repair the damage. How did he know, I asked him, which of them was the truest believer? Any secular or state-run outfit could be doing what he was doing, fitting prosthetic limbs and providing shelter and counselling, but in order to be Joseph Kony, one had to have real faith. To my surprise, he did not dismiss my question. It was true, he said, that Kony's authority arose in part from his background in a priestly Christian family. It was also true that people were apt to believe he could work miracles by appealing to the spirit world and promising his acolytes that they were death-proof. Even some of those who had run away would still swear that they had seen wonders performed by the man. All that a missionary could do was to try and show people a different face of Christianity. I was impressed by this man's frankness. There were some other defences that he might have offered. Joseph Kony is obviously far away from the Christian mainstream. For one thing, his paymasters and armourers are the cynical Muslims of the Sudanese regime, who use him to make trouble for the government of Uganda, which has in turn supported rebel groups in Sudan. In an apparent reward for this support, Kony at one stage began denouncing the keeping and eating of pigs, which, unless he has become a fundamentalist Jew in his old age, suggests a payoff to his bosses. These Sudanese murderers, in their turn, have for years been conducting a war of extermination, not just against the Christians and animists of southern Sudan, but against the non-Arab Muslims of Darfur province. Islam may officially make no distinction between races and nations, but the slaughterers in Darfur are Arab Muslims and their victims are African Muslims. The Lord's Resistance Army is nothing but a Christian Khmer Rouge sideshow in this more general horror. An even more graphic example is afforded by the case of Rwanda, which in 1992 gave the world a new synonym for genocide and sadism. This former Belgian possession is the most Christian country in Africa, boasting the highest percentage of churches per head of population, with 65% of Rwandans professing Roman Catholicism and another 15% adhering to various Protestant sects. The words per head took on a macabre ring in 1992, when at a given signal the racist militias of Hutu power, incited by state and church, fell upon their Tutsi neighbours and slaughtered them en masse. This was no atavistic spasm of bloodletting, but a coldly rehearsed African version of the final solution, which had been in preparation for some time. The early warning of it came in 1987, when a Catholic visionary with the deceptively folksy name of Little Pebbles began to boast of hearing voices and seeing visions, these deriving from the Virgin Mary. The said voices and visions were distressingly bloody, predicting massacre and apocalypse, but also, as if in compensation, the return of Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday 1992. Apparitions of Mary, on a hilltop named Kibeho, were investigated by the Catholic Church and announced to be reliable. The wife of the Rwandan president, Agatha Habyarimana, was specially entranced by these visions and maintained a close relationship with the Bishop of Kigali, Rwanda's capital city. This man, Monsignor Vincent Nsengiyumva, was also a Central Committee member of President Habyarimana's single ruling party, the National Revolutionary Movement for Development, or NRMD. This party, together with other organs of state, was fond of rounding up any women of whom it disapproved as prostitutes, and of encouraging Catholic activists to trash any stores that sold contraceptives. Over time, the word spread that prophecy would be fulfilled and that the cockroaches, the Tutsi minority, would soon get what was coming to them. When the apocalyptic year of 1994 actually hit and the premeditated and coordinated massacres began, many frightened Tutsi and dissident Hutu were unwise enough to try and take refuge in churches. This made life considerably easier for the Interahamwe, or government and military death squads, who knew where to find them and who could rely on priests and nuns to point out the locations. This is why so many of the mass grave sites that have been photographed are on consecrated ground, and it is also why several clergymen and nuns are in the dock at the ongoing Rwandan genocide trials. The notorious Father Wenceslas Munyashaka, for example, a leading figure at the Kigali Cathedral of Saint-Famille, was smuggled out of the country with the assistance of French priests, but he has since been charged with genocide, with providing lists of civilians to the Interahamwe, and with the rape of young refugee women. He is by no means the only cleric to have faced similar charges. Lest it be thought that he was merely a rogue priest, we have the word of another member of the Rwandan hierarchy, the Bishop of Gikongoro, otherwise known as Monsignor Augustin Misago. To quote one careful account of these atrocious events, Bishop Misago was often described as a Hutu power sympathizer. He had been publicly accused of barring Tutsis from places of refuge, criticizing fellow members of the clergy who helped cockroaches, and asking a Vatican emissary who visited Rwanda in June 1994 to tell a pope to find a place for Tutsi priests because the Rwandan people do not want them anymore. What's more, on May 4 of that year, shortly before the last Marian apparition at Kibeho, the bishop appeared there himself with a team of policemen and told a group of 90 Tutsi schoolchildren who were being held in preparation for slaughter not to worry, because the police would protect them. 3 days later, the police helped to massacre 82 of the children. Schoolchildren held in preparation for slaughter. Perhaps you remember the Pope's denunciation of this ineffaceable crime, and of the complicity of his church in it? Or perhaps you do not, since no such comment was ever made. Paul Rusesabagina, the hero of Hotel Rwanda, remembers Father Wenceslas Munyashaka referring even to his own Tutsi mother as a cockroach. But this did not prevent him, before his arrest in France, from being allowed by the French Church to resume his pastoral duties. As for Bishop Misago, there were those in the post-war Rwandan Ministry of Justice who felt that he should be charged as well. But as one of the officials of the ministry phrased it, the Vatican is too strong and too unapologetic for us to go taking on bishops. Haven't you heard of infallibility? At a minimum, this makes it impossible to argue that religion causes people to behave in a more kindly or civilized manner. The worse the offender, the more devout he turns out to be. It can be added that some of the most dedicated relief workers are also believers, though as it happens the best ones I have met are secularists who are not trying to proselytize for any faith. But the chance that a person committing the crimes was faith-based was almost 100%, while the chances that a person of faith was on the side of humanity and decency were about as good as the odds of a coin flip. Extend this back into history and the odds become more like those of an astrological prediction that just happens to come true. This is because religions could never have got started, let alone thrived, unless for the influence of men as fanatical as Moses or Muhammad or Joseph Kony. While charity and relief work, while they may appeal to tender-hearted believers, are the inheritors of modernism and the Enlightenment. Before that, religion was spread not by example, but as an auxiliary to the more old-fashioned methods of holy war and imperialism. I was a guarded admirer of the late Pope John Paul II, who by any human standards was a brave and serious person, capable of displaying both moral and physical courage. He helped the anti-Nazi resistance in his native country as a young man, and in later life did much to assist its emancipation from Soviet rule. His papacy was in some ways shockingly conservative and authoritarian, but showed itself open to science and inquiry, except when the AIDS virus was under discussion, and even in its dogma about abortion made some concessions to a life ethic, which, for example, began to teach that capital punishment was almost always wrong. On his death, Pope John Paul was praised, among other things, for the number of apologies he had made. These did not include, as they should have done, an atonement for the 1 million or so put to the sword in Rwanda. However, they did include an apology to the Jews for the centuries of Christian anti-Semitism, an apology to the Muslim world for the Crusades, an apology to Eastern Orthodox Christians for the many persecutions that Rome had inflicted upon them too, and some general contrition about the Inquisition as well. This seemed to say that the Church had mainly been wrong and often criminal in the past, but was now purged of its sin by confession and quite ready to be infallible all over again.